everyone, welcome to today's video, and today I'm going to be doing part 2 of my December wrap-up. I was hoping to get this video out a few days ago, but I'm a little under the weather, so it just took a lot longer for me to be able to sit down and film, but I am feeling a lot better now. So I'm going to be going over the books I read in December that were not part of Cloak and Dagger Christmas. So I read around 24 books in December, and 7 of them were covered in my Cloak and Dagger Christmas wrap-up. So these are the rest of the books that I read in December. So once exams were finished around the 14th of December, I just read and read and read. Christmas break is the best time for me when it comes to reading. I soak up all those books before I get back to school in January. So I read quite a bit. I do have to say though that some of them were shorter, like fairy tales. I read a couple children's picture books, we'll get to that in a minute, and I read a couple shorter novella length books. So it wasn't 24 full-length novels, but it was still a really successful reading month. So without further ado, I'm just gonna get started. So for these books, I'm not going in any particular order, but I will start with the books that all have to do with my favorite ballet of all time, The Nutcracker. So I read the original Nutcracker story by E.T.A. Hoffman. So this is the original Nutcracker story that the ballet is based off of. And we follow a young girl named Marie who receives a Nutcracker on Christmas Eve as a gift from a man named Drosselmeyer, Godfather Drosselmeyer. And basically the Nutcracker comes to life and she witnesses some crazy things. She witnesses some mice fighting, and her parents don't really believe that she's experiencing these things, obviously. They think she's just dreaming and has a big imagination. And one day the Nutcracker takes her to the Kingdom of Dolls in an effort to defeat the villain of the story, which is the Mouse King. So yeah, this book is just whimsy and adventure and magic and everything that I needed for the Christmas season. It was just amazing. It was adorable. I think this is my favorite Christmas story now. And so because I loved it so much, I needed more. So I watched the Nutcracker Ballet on YouTube. I haven't been able to go see it in person yet, but that's definitely on my bucket list. And I also read 2 picture books that have to do with the Nutcracker. So first we have The Nutcracker, retold by Stephanie Spinner. And this one was okay. I gave this one a 3-star rating. It was missing some scenes from the original story that I think were important or like should have been in the book. And the illustration style isn't really my favorite, but yeah, this one was cute, so I gave this 3 stars. But my favorite picture book out of the 2 is this one called The Nutcracker, and this is based on the New York City Ballet, The Nutcracker, and the illustrations in this one were the best. I really enjoyed this one. Just absolutely gorgeous illustrations. You can see that. And while reading it, I actually had the Nutcracker Suite playing from the ballet because the music's also amazing. So yeah, in case you can't tell, I couldn't get enough of the Nutcracker this Christmas. I then read a few shorter Christmas stories and fairy tales. So the first one is The Fir Tree, and this is by Hans Christian Andersen. And basically it's a really cute, short, sweet story about a fir tree, and it's from his perspective. And he's basically just anxious to grow up and experience different things. But he doesn't realize that sometimes you just have to live in the moment, because many times as time goes by, you start to realize what you missed. So that's basically what the story is about. I gave it 3 stars. So I listened to this fairy tale on audio and it was cute. Like I did give it 3 stars, but it wasn't the best fairy tale that I've ever read. It didn't draw me in like other fairy tales do, and I found it pretty forgetful, to be honest. So yeah, it was okay. It was a cute story and it was perfect for the Christmas season. Another fairy tale I read that I ended up giving 5 stars to is The Snow Queen, also by Hans Christian Andersen. This fairy tale was so charming, so atmospheric. I literally felt cold reading it, and I love when a story can do that. I don't have the book with me, but the edition that I read it out of had very beautiful illustrations, and that just brought it up a whole level. So it was a beautiful story. And basically we have 2 young kids who are childhood friends. We have Gerda and Kai. And one day Kai is kidnapped by the Snow Queen and taken to her palace. And Gerda decides to try to save him. So she goes on a quest to find Kai. And I love how it's kind of like a role reversal, where it's not the boy going after the girl who's been kidnapped, but vice versa. And it was just so sweet. And Gerda encountered some interesting characters along the way, and the ending was beautiful. I loved The Snow Queen, and it was perfect to read around Christmas, although it's perfect to read any time of the year. I then read 2 Charles Dickens shorter Christmas stories, and I read A Christmas Carol and also The Cricket on the Hearth. So A Christmas Carol was a reread for me. I read it last year and I love it. 5 out of 5 stars. I'm sure you're all familiar with the story. Ebenezer Scrooge, he just hates life, he hates Christmas, he hates everything and everyone. And he kind of needs a rude awakening to come to realize that life is actually beautiful and Christmas is beautiful and family is beautiful. So yeah, I recommend A Christmas Carol to everyone. And then The Cricket on the Hearth, I gave it a 2.75 out of 5. It was okay. The Cricket on the Hearth is basically about a man named John and his wife Dot and their little baby boy. And a mysterious stranger visits them one night, and we get to learn more about him later on in the story. But basically, we just get to see John and Dot's relationship, which I thought Dickens did a really good job of portraying. It was really sweet. They have a very, very cute relationship. And they also have a cricket that lives on their hearth, and he's kind of like a guardian angel. And at one point in the story, he actually speaks to John, which I found really cute. And then we have another character named Caleb, and he is a toy maker, but he basically lives in poverty, and he also has a son that went missing. So he's very down on his luck. And so the story is basically John, his wife, and Caleb and how their lives interact. There are a couple other characters, and honestly, after chapter 1, I just didn't really care anymore. I was pretty bored throughout the story. I just wasn't as interested in the characters as I was hoping I would be, and I feel like it just doesn't have the same charm as A Christmas Carol does. I guess you could say it didn't pull on my heartstrings the way A Christmas Carol does, but it does have a very good ending. So those are the 2 Dickens Christmas stories that I read. Another book that I read in December is a book of poetry with watercolor paintings, and that is The Lost Spells by Robert Macfarlane, and the artist is Jackie Morris. I have to say, this is one of the most beautiful books I have ever seen. I could not get enough of it. I could not get enough of the paintings. I could not get enough of the poetry. This book is just a work of art, and I don't even know what to say about it other than if you love nature, if you love art, if you love poetry, if you love animals, read this book, please. It is a quick read. It is amazing. This is definitely one I'm going to be coming back to time and time again. The next book I want to talk about is called The Reluctant Duchess. This is by Rosanna M. White, and this is the second book in the Ladies of the Manor trilogy. So the book starts off with our main character, Lady Rowena, in her home in the Scottish Highlands, where she lives with her father and her stepmother and stepsister. And she's basically an heiress to her father's earldom. Unfortunately, Rowena has experienced a lot of abuse at the hands of her fiancé and her father, and one day Rowena is violently attacked by her fiancé, and in an effort to protect her and save her from his clutches, she basically agrees to marry an English duke named Bryce Myerston. And Bryce seems to be the only hope of Rowena's escape. By marrying him, she can move to England and away from her father and her former fiancé. The first book in this series was basically the start of a mystery revolving around jewels, and I don't want to say much more without giving any spoilers for the first book, but Bryce is basically involved now. He was a side character in the first book, and in this book he ends up involved with the issue of these jewels. So basically, Rowena comes from a dangerous situation, moves to England, but she hasn't escaped danger altogether because of what Bryce has to deal with in England. So overall, I did enjoy this book. I gave it a 3 out of 5, but unfortunately I did have some issues with it. It is really unfortunate because I read another trilogy by this author and absolutely adored it. So one of the issues I have is that the protagonist basically has to marry someone to escape another man. I just don't like it when a girl has to marry some dude to be saved from another dude. It's just not something I enjoy. Unless there's more, I guess, like an enemies to lovers aspect of it, but I just didn't really enjoy it in this book. I also felt that Bryce was an unrealistic character. He was just too goody two-shoes, and he was like over the top doting on Rowena. It just didn't make any sense to me. Like, he knew her for 2 days and he's acting like she's the love of his life, so that was a little unrealistic. Rowena was also a really annoying character at times. She seemed to have like 2 personalities in a way. She went from being this like, she would go from being meek and shy and scared and just unable to be herself to a fiercely independent woman, and it was unsettling and it didn't really make sense. I feel like if the author had explored more of Rowena on like a mental health level, it could have made more sense, but as this book is, it was odd. She was also quite gullible for a woman in her early 20s and felt more like a teenager at times. This book is a Christian fiction, and the spiritual, like, faith aspect of it was also not the best I've seen. Every time Bryce had a difficult decision to make or was just in a predicament where he didn't know what to do, It was like every answer was handed to him on a silver platter, and it was always, oh, God said this and God said that. But that's not realistic. Even for people with a strong faith, not everything is that easy in life, you know, not everything is handed to you. So besides that, I did enjoy the side characters and the mystery revolving around the jewels, and that all goes into the third book, which I also read. And the third book is called A Lady Unrivaled, and I gave this one a 3.75 out of 5 stars. So Bryce has a sister named Ella, and she was a side character in book 2, and in this book, she is the main character. And we also have a man named Lord Caton, and he basically is grieving the loss of his wife, and he has turned to art and various pursuits to kind of help him cope with that loss. And then Ella, on the other hand, is a bubbly, joyous person who is just always trying to see the good in people. And she's also a very curious person. So Ella being Ella, she decides that she wants to know what's going on with this jewel business that started in book 1. And again, without giving any spoilers, she kind of puts herself in the line of fire, so to speak. And now she's in danger, so there's just a lot more to the story than it looked like in the first book. And Ella and Caton work together to try to figure out what to do about this business with the jewels. But at the beginning, they don't really get along, so there is a little bit of an enemies to lovers trope in this one. I have to say, the camaraderie was amazing in this book. It was so much fun. The dialogue was much better in this book as well, and Ella and Caton had the best moments together. They were hilarious. So I definitely enjoyed this one a lot more than the first 2 books. So the villain that we're introduced to in book 1, their story arc spans the trilogy. So the completion of their story arc in this book was very well done. I really enjoyed it, but I did not enjoy the ending to the mystery, like the whole jewel thing. The ending wasn't great. It just wasn't great. I didn't like how it was resolved, but the characters definitely made me enjoy this book more than I could have, and yeah, so I completed this trilogy as well, and I do want to read more from this author. I do think authors improve from book to book for the most part, so I am excited to continue reading her books because the trilogy that she wrote after this one is a really good trilogy, and I really enjoyed it a lot more. I am really excited to continue on with her books. Another book I read in December is called A Soul as Cold as Frost, and this is basically a Christmassy, wintry fantasy book that takes place in Southern Ontario, surprisingly. I have never read a book set in Southern Ontario. Actually, that's a lie. The Blue Castle by Ella Montgomery is set in Ontario. But other than that book, I don't think I've read any other books set here. So we have a girl named Helen Bell, and she is 16 years old, and Helen lives with her siblings and her grandma. They were orphaned when they were little, so they live with their grandma. And one day she's out doing some last minute Christmas shopping when she is approached by a very odd looking girl, and Helen is given what looks to be like a glass orb called the frostbit orb. She also starts to notice different things that she hasn't noticed before that don't seem to be of our world. And so Helen meets a boy named Zane who is from a place called the Realm of Winter. And then Helen learns that the Realm of Winter has been intersecting with Earth. So she's able to see these different things and these different creatures. Helen kind of like brushes it off. She thinks she's going crazy. She thinks she's losing her mind until she is basically convinced by Zane, the boy that she meets, to go on this train, and this train takes them to Winter. Helen learns that in Winter there once was a king, and he is now dead, and Winter was taken over by an evil queen named Mara Rouge. Because Helen was given this frostbit orb, she was basically chosen to be a carrier, and these carriers are meant to carry around these orbs, although we don't quite know why until much later on in the book. They're basically called carriers of truth, and every carrier of truth has a patrolman or someone that watches out for them. So Zane is Helen's patrolman. And in Winter, it is just a beautiful place. The descriptions were amazing. I got such strong vibes of like a mix of Narnia and the Nutcracker and even the Polar Express, like all those vibes. So it was definitely a fun book to read. At one point, Helen is in a tavern and there's this menu, and some of the items on the menu sound so like whimsical and wintry and fun. So some of them are, there's ground pine dust cocoa, lumber dark brew, white forest ginger and bean blend, northern spice bush twig tea, black glacier pie, crispy toast with juniper berry spread, ice berry pudding, dark chocolate beans with sweet spices, and hints of sugary orange and creamy licorice. I love food descriptions. I love food. So yeah, it was definitely enjoyable. I gave it a 3 out of 5 just because I have some issues with the world building. It was very confusing for the first like half of the book. There were so many terms introduced without much explanation as to what they are. And I do think it's hard to give a reader the lay of the land, so to speak, you know, when creating a new world, but it could have maybe used a glossary or a map or something like that to, you know, help me understand what was going on, because it was quite confusing. There were also times when I felt that Helen was a little bit aloof, I guess. Like, she was kind of there for the ride, and I just wasn't as attached to her as a character. But it was a very cute, Christmassy fantasy story. So if you're ever in the mood for something very whimsical and Christmassy, I definitely recommend A Soul as Cold as Frost. I also read Blood for Blood by Ryan Groudon, and this is the sequel to Wolf by Wolf, which I read, I think, in November. I cried at the end. I cried tears of emotional pain. And I don't cry while reading books. I could probably list off like 2 or 3 books that actually made me cry physical tears. This is one of them. So the first book was basically about a girl named Yael, and she was in a concentration camp as a kid, but then she escaped. And it's an alternate history where the Axis powers won World War II. So we have Nazi Germany and we have the Japanese Empire. And in the first book, Yael was used for medical experiments in the concentration camps that gave her the ability to skin shift. So she can basically have the physical appearance of other people. And so she uses that to her advantage to be able to enter a motorcycle race, and at the end of the race to be able to meet Hitler and then kill him. And so that book ended on a huge cliffhanger, and this book was just twist and turn and reveals, and it was so good. And then I cried, and my heart, I was very emotional reading it. So if you love historical fiction, even if YA isn't really your genre, I definitely recommend this duology. It is quite unconventional, being an alternate history. I've never read anything like it, but highly, highly, highly recommend. So this next book is a reread for me. I read it in 2020 and then I reread it again, and that is Little Women. Do I need to say anything about Little Women? If you don't know what Little Women is about, which that would make me sad, but if you don't, it's basically about 4 girls, sisters. We have Amy, Meg, Jo, and Beth. And it's around the time of the Civil War, and so their circumstances haven't been the best. They're a lot more poor than they used to be, and it's basically just their amazing time as sisters. And each of the sisters has such a special place in my heart. Each character in this book has a special place in my heart. Ever since I was a little girl, I would watch the 1998 4 adaptation, and I always wanted to be a part of this family. That hasn't changed. This is my favorite fictional family, and this book is like an antidepressant. It is just amazing. Even though there are sad scenes in it, I just feel so happy anytime that I pick this book up. Sometimes I'll just randomly pick it up and just read a random passage, and it's like a warm cup of tea, and it's amazing, and I think everyone should read this book. Oh, I love this book so much. I will probably read this again this upcoming December. I might make this a every December type of book, because I end up watching the movie every November and December, and it's just the best. So yeah, that's Little Women. The next book that I read was one that I have been wanting to read for so long, and I finally read it, and that is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis, and I read it out of this massive bind up. So in November I read The Magician's Nephew, which is the first book chronologically, and then I read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe in December. It was so beautiful. 5 out of 5 stars. One of the most whimsical and heartfelt stories I have ever read in my life. And I just want to go back into Narnia with Lucy, Susan, Edmund, and Peter. Oh, these siblings, these characters, the lion Aslan, he's just so majestic. And this book, I can't believe I did not read any of these books as a kid. Like, it boggles my mind how I never read them as a kid. So yeah, I'm looking forward to continuing with the series, although I have a feeling none of the other books are going to beat The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe for me, but the first 2 books, awesome start to the series. These last 3 books are part of a series that I read as a child, and now I'm rereading them again as an adult and having the best time, and that's the Little House on the Prairie series. So first we have book 4, which is On the Banks of Plum Creek. We have book 5, which is By the Shores of Silver Lake. And then book 6 is The Long Winter. So in On the Banks of Plum Creek, we start where we left off in the previous book, which was Little House on the Prairie. And the Ingalls family basically had to leave the prairie in Kansas, and they moved to Minnesota. And so in this book, we just get to see the Ingalls family and all their hardships that they continue to face after their move. The girls finally get to go to school, And this book was just beautiful. It was amazing. I gave it a 5 out of 5. I had such an amazing time reading it. And yeah, I highly recommend the audiobooks as well. The narrator did a really good job with each of the characters, and yeah, this is a series I will definitely be coming back to. I'm really coming to realize that I love classic children's literature, and I'm just absolutely obsessed with this series. I did grow up watching the show, and I did read these books as a kid, but I don't know, it's like I'm reading them for the first time. It's just amazing. Next is By the Shores of Silver Lake, and this one I gave a 4 out of 5. And the Ingalls family move yet again in this book. It seems like Charles Ingalls just constantly had the desire to be moving around and trying new things out. So in this one, they move from Minnesota to Dakota, and they basically start fresh. They try to like build a homestead, and they spend part of their time in a town nearby, and yeah, this one was really enjoyable as well. And then last but not least, The Long Winter. This one I also gave a 4 out of 5, and this one was so perfect for those cold winter nights at the end of December. Basically in this one, the Ingalls family have to deal with a 7-month-long winter full of blizzards and lack of food because the trains weren't able to come in through the snow, and so a lot of their neighbors are starving, and it's very bleak, but the family does their best to just make do with what they have, and this one was also really enjoyable. One thing is crystal clear, I would not survive living as they did. Like, months of blizzards. I mean, I live in Southern Ontario and we get pretty nasty winters too, but 7 months of blizzards and minus 40 degrees Celsius weather is just insane. And then to think they relied on, you know, firewood for warmth, and they ran out of coal, they ran out of firewood, so they were using straw to make fires and keep warm, and it's just insane. This series definitely puts my life in perspective and makes me a lot more thankful for what I have. So that is it, everyone. That is the rest of the books I read in December. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching. I'd love to know what you all read in December and what you're planning to read this winter. And yeah, I hope to see you all in my next video, and I hope you all have a wonderful new year. Bye.